Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, so this afternoon we are joined by Mr. Trevor Reshney. Trevor is from the Florida League of Cities. Thank you very much. I usually just say a few words that are completely meaningless so that people can quiet down. Now I can start. Okay, thank you. So Trevor Reshney is from the Florida League of Cities. He's here today because we are doing a program this year of discrimination and harassment training. This is an training not so that you can better discriminate and harass. It's training on how to recognize it, how to not do it, and how to prevent it, both from your perspective and the perspective of others in the workplace. And the reason why the Florida League of Cities has a vested interest in this is that we have an insurance program with them, which is an employment practices liability insurance program. And what that means is that if there are any claims on the basis of discrimination, harassment, hostile work environment, all those type of things, that means that they have to defend our position as a city. So for them, it's in their best interest as well as ours to make sure that we have all of our policies and procedures and processes and training down pat. There is a sign-up sheet which is going around the room. It's on that clipboard there. Please make sure you print your name legibly so that we know who you are, and then sign to say that you were here. And at the end of the day, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and just make sure that everybody has signed up, or everybody has signed into the class. And then we're going to have, we're going to make arrangements for those who are not on the list. So just make sure that you're on the list if you're here today. We are joined today by Trevor's daughter, who's at the back there. Her name is Ava. Say hello, Ava. She's here to witness some of the horrors that her father has to endure to put food on the table. So please be gentle with him. We were over at Public Works this morning. We had Dan Tucci in the audience, so he's already asked all the questions. But if you have any additional questions, please feel free as we go along. This is not kind of something where you have to kind of stay quiet until the end. It's fairly interactive, and so feel free. Also, this class today is going to be recorded. And the reason we're doing that is because for those who somehow missed it, or for police officers who are on these kind of odd schedules, we're going to assign them this recording to actually view and to sign off in their training log that they've actually viewed the training. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Trevor. Trevor is, as I say, with the Florida League of Cities. He's our risk management and safety consultant. He gets involved with us on numerous things, claims reviews, inspections of all kinds of facilities, and this type of training. So he's a very useful resource. I think you're going to find his style very nice to listen to. He's kind of easygoing. He's not going to stand there and kind of lecture with the law. It's kind of a nice format that we got, so hopefully you will enjoy it. And I will be here for the duration, and afterwards, if there's anything you want to ask me, either about this or anything else, sometimes people will say, seeing as I'm here, I'll ask you about this or that. Please feel free. Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. You guys can hear? Good. It's usually very lively and fun, but we're being recorded, so I'm going to have to tone it down a little bit. So you guys are lucky you get that. All right, so the part of the presentation, we should be done probably 5 or 6 o'clock tonight. You guys are good for that? So, all right, got that up? Perfect. All right, so it's hostile workplace prevention is the key, the prevention being the key word here. The course outline it's pretty good. Basically, we're going to do a brief introduction to what the rules are and just give you some examples of different types of, some local examples. And I think you guys will get a kick out of section number 2. One of the cool things about working at the league is every single day, and I got one today and I got one yesterday, I get this email from a lady her name is Brittany. She works in Tallahassee, and she basically scours all the local newspapers across the state, and she just filters in all the stuff that cities do that are getting into trouble. So there's a lot of these things that it happens every single day. There's a mayor or a councilman or just someone in the city that does something they shouldn't do and makes the newspaper somehow. So I get those every day. So I put 4 pretty cool examples here that you'll get an idea of some of the stuff that people try to do within Florida cities. When we're done section 2, we're going to look at the different types of harassment. So what are the different types of harassment? Just yell it out. How could you be harassed? Sexually. What else?
Bullying.
Really, bullying. Does bullying happen to adults?
Yes.
Absolutely. And actually, that's a section that I'm not a bullying expert by any means, but when I was putting together this course and I was doing the research on some of the stats, it really blew my mind how much workplace bullying exists. So we have the sexual side, then we have the non-sexual side, basically. And including the non-sexual side, bullying is part of that, obviously. So we're going to discuss both of those in greater detail. My favorite part of the course is at the very end, and that's basically, what do we do about it? So if you're being harassed, or you have a coworker who's being harassed, how do we stop it, is really the question. So that's the course in a nutshell. It's a little bit over an hour, traditionally. That's how long it takes, so you won't be here too long. But I think you'll like it. So the first thing is my disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. Don't ask me lawyer-type questions. Usually I stay at the Holiday Inn, but since I had my daughter with me, I stayed at the what's it called again? Hampton Inn. So I don't even have the lawyer credentials from the Holiday Inn anymore, so I can't even ask that. So if you have any legal questions, just make sure you talk to HR specifically about those type of things. Okay? Ready to go? Who's excited? Who's excited? We got the IT guys excited. Other than that, there's no one else. Okay, so here's the policy. We're going to do this together on the count of 3. I don't like reading policies, so I'll let you guys read it. You guys can see the screens. On the count of 3, we're going to start reading from the word every. 1, 2, 3, go. You got it? That's the way we're going to do the rest of the class. I'm just going to tell you to read the slides, and you're just going to read the slides. It's the best way to teach. Okay, so let's review this. Every city employee is responsible to do what? If you're being harassed, what does the policy say you have to do?
Immediately report.
You have to report it, right? To who? To your supervisor. But what if it's your supervisor doing the harassing? Which happens from time to time, right? You're nodding with like, do you have something you want to say? Okay. It does happen, doesn't it? We do have supervisors that harass. So if that's the case, then go bypass your supervisor, go to that person's boss, or go straight to HR. All right, good. Question, where would you guys rather work? Would you rather work somewhere happy? Or would you rather work somewhere hostile? And by the way, this picture, they're pointing at you, laughing at you. They're not having fun. They're having fun at your expense. Where would you rather work? Happy? Raise your hands if it's happy. Hostile? Raise your hands if you'd rather work hostile. Yeah, I didn't think so. I've never had anyone ever say they wanted to work somewhere hostile. What would happen if I said you get a $500 a month raise, but we're going to have to be a very hostile work environment? Terrible workers, co-workers, you're shaking your head like it's not worth it, right? $1,000 a month? 10,000? Okay, there you go. So we all have a number, right? Somewhere in that continuum is a number that will take it. But for the most part, it's very true that people don't want to work in a bad environment. They want to work somewhere happy. They want to work somewhere they enjoy. And even if you were getting paid more somewhere else and it was hostile, what would you eventually end up doing? You're probably going to quit, right? You're probably going to find a new place to work. So it's interesting. Oh, there was that picture. You're probably wondering what I'm talking about. There's the picture. See, they're pointing at you laughing. See, it makes sense now, right? All right. Okay, so here's the deal. When I first started with the league, I'm relatively new with the league. I sat through the guy who I took over from, and I sat in the back through his classes, about 8 of them. All right, it was brutal, and I listened to him talk about harassment, and I heard the same things from the people in the back of the room. It's always the back of the room for some reason. Why is that? Here's what they said. They're trying to take the fun out of work. They can't tell me what to think or what my beliefs are. They're trying to change my values, all this kind of stuff, right? Is that kind of what you had in mind here, that what's going to happen? Am I trying to take the fun out of your work? No, not at all. It's actually the farthest from the truth. So I don't want to take the fun out of your work. I don't want to change your beliefs. In fact, I don't really care what you believe. And honestly, I couldn't change it if I wanted to. You know, your beliefs are your beliefs. Same thing with your moral code. I can't change your moral code in an hour. I don't think I could do it in 10 years. You know, your morals are your internal things. They belong to you. I can't change that. I can't change your values either. So we're not trying to do that. It's not the purpose of this course. All right? So what is the purpose of this course? Well, first of all, you have the right to think what you want to think. You have the right to say what you want to say. Within reason, right? Like, you're not allowed to say fire in a movie theater. You know, it's within reason, obviously. We have that, the First Amendment. And then, of course, we have the right to value what you want to value. If you have certain political beliefs, keep them, they're yours. If you have certain religious beliefs, again, they're yours. If you're a racist or a bigot, it doesn't matter, because what's in your mind is okay. But what really matters?
When it comes out.
Yeah, when it starts to affect your work, when it starts to affect your work environment, right? So here's the key. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to create a workplace, a culture, a work environment, that is welcoming, respectful, and friendly to all employees. Is that a fair goal? When you hire a new employee working for your department, do you want that new employee to feel welcome? Yeah, of course. What happens when you started? Did you want to feel welcome or did you want to get picked on? All right. Now, I will admit, I used to work for a city a long time ago when I was a youngster, when I was 18, 19, 20-ish. And we would haze the crap out of the new employees. That was part of our culture back then. And it was pretty brutal, I have to admit. Some of it was pretty funny, but it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal what we did. I was a lifeguard. I worked in the parks department. And, we were young, so we would go out after work, and we would do things to people. The one I remember, which I thought was funny, and I use this as an example, is you take someone's keys. This is before they had like electronics. It was just keys back then. Remember back in those days? There was so you take their keys and you tie it to a brick and you drop it to the bottom of the dive tank. So it's like 18 feet underwater. So they're all dolled up. They got their makeup done, their hair done. They have their outfit on. They're ready to go out and party. And they're like, let's go. Just looking for keys. And you're like, everyone's laughing. We're like, we'll see you at the bar. And she'd have to get undressed, put her swimsuit on, and go back down and get them. That's the kind of stuff we would do. All right? Is that harassment? It's funny, right? But is it harassment? Yes. Absolutely. No question. All right, so why is this all important? In 2017, they did a study. The Society for Human Resource Managers did a study. And what they found for the third year in a row, okay, so this is not a recent development. This is a continuously, this is what traditionally happens with this particular survey. They found that the largest percentage of people who took this survey found that respectful treatment was the most important part that contributed to their job satisfaction. So it's not as much as a pay issue or a benefit issue or anything like that. What made people happy at work was what? Respect. Would you guys agree with that? There was a guy this morning who disagreed with it. He said you have to have enough money first, which is true, because you wouldn't even be there if there wasn't enough money. Right? Like so. But once you're there and you're in that job, what makes you happy at that job is whether you're treated with respect or not. All right? We agree with that statement? Good. All right. So here's what the harassment's not. Okay? You're allowed to have different point of views. Okay? I look around the room, I see a bunch of different people. The chances of everyone in this room having the same beliefs about anything is 0. Think politics, for example. You want to have a little debate on politics? Do you think there's any way that all of us would have the same beliefs? There's no way, right? So you're allowed to have different point of view, and that's okay. That's the beautiful thing about this country, all right? We're also allowed to have intellectual agreements on how to get the job done or just anything. You can disagree with one another, and that's not harassment. You're allowed to have relationships of mutual consent, and that's not harassment. Mutual consent is kind of the key here, right? You both want a relationship, and you're allowed to have that relationship. But if we have a situation where a subordinate is dating a supervisor, for example, what could happen there? Favoritism. We may have favoritism, some kind of conflict of interest. So if that ever happens, here's what I've been instructed to tell you. Don't hide it, make it public. All right, so tell your boss's boss, let HR know, because what they'll do at that point, again, it's okay. You're allowed to have those type of relationships, but what they'll do at that point is they'll make sure that they switch your boss to somebody else, so there's no longer that direct line anymore. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, moving on. Harassment is not innocent comments that are said without malice. How many of you guys have said something stupid in your life before? The 4 ladies in the front all put their hands up simultaneously. Okay, yeah. Do you want to give me an example of one of the stupid ones you said? She can't lie. All right, I will do mine then. Okay, so I was young, right? And when you're young, you say stupid things. And I was working at the pool, and it was in the middle of the daytime. The pool was basically empty, and I'm making conversation with the lady who was paddling around, basically. And I asked her a very simple question. So when are you due? I know. You're thinking, why would somebody say that, right? I don't know. I was trying to make conversation. She wasn't pregnant. All right. She was just a little bit. And she even said, I'm swimming so I could lose a little bit of weight. Okay, good. So, of course, foot and mouth, the whole thing. If she would have went to my boss and said, hey, that guy out there is a complete jerk. He just called me fat. Would she have been right? Would that have been harassment? Did I, by the way, I immediately probably went, uh-oh, my eyes probably opened up like this, and I immediately like said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't, you know, I had you mix it with somebody else, or I apologize, whatever, right? I know. I made my best effort to get out, though, right? That's all that matters, right? She could clearly tell that I was probably embarrassed. All right, so if she would have said that to my boss, could I have been fired? I don't know, right? It's probably not, because it was said without malice. I really didn't mean it. All right. Management direction of staff. How many of you guys are supervisors or directors or anything like that, or a manager? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you guys are allowed to actually tell your employees what to do still. Okay? That's the benefit of being the boss. You can tell people what to do. And the flip side, those of you that are not the bosses, your bosses can tell you what to do, and it's not harassment. Okay? Everybody understand that? That's a key. They're also allowed at this point to insist on good work performance. If you do a really bad job with that spreadsheet or whatever task you have, and they say, hey, redo it, that's okay, that you have to redo it. That's your job. They can insist on good work performance, and they can criticize you for bad performance. All right? Equal enforcement of policies. So is there, give me an example of a policy. Actually, let's go with attendance. That's an easy one. Is there an attendance policy? Yeah? If you come in work late, what happens? Nothing? Maybe verbal. If you come in late again, what happens? Maybe we get a written, all right? Something progressive, probably, right? So that is allowed. We have a policy, they're enforcing the policy, that's okay. As long as it's equal enforcement. When wouldn't it be equal? Where the boss only writes up the females in the office for being late, but doesn't write up the males in the office for being late. Well, that's unequal enforcement of policy, right? All right. Singular and trivial behavior, that's kind of like the comment type thing. Doing something stupid just that one time again. And think about stuff. We've all done something stupid. We admitted to it before, right? So when someone else does something stupid, just kind of give them a little leeway. Maybe it only happened once and it's kind of uncharacteristic of the person. That's okay. We don't need to go and make that complaint immediately. Now, if that singular behavior becomes a pattern or it's repeated, that's a different story. But we all make mistakes periodically. Agreed? So when someone else makes a mistake, maybe give them a break. File it in the back of your mind as that happened. Maybe even talk to them. Say, hey, that wasn't really an appropriate comment. But at that point, I don't think we need to go running to HR yet for that singular trivial thing. All right, so what is harassment? All right, so we talked about sexual harassment already. We talked about, you mentioned this discrimination, you said, I think was the term you used. Okay, so is that part of what harassment could be? Getting discriminated against? Okay, let's take a look at the Florida statutes to see what they say. So this is the Florida statutes. It's kind of small, but anyways, harassment is unwelcome conduct, okay, that is based on someone's race, their color, their religion, their sex, including whether you're pregnant or not, national origin, age, protected class of 40 or over. Anyone here under 40? You're not protected yet. But you know what? If I had to choose between protected and being young, I choose being young. Personally, I don't know. That's the age. If someone didn't hire you, for example, because you're older than 40, you would have a discrimination case.
That's before you're actually in the workplace.
Yes, yeah, or even here, if they terminated your employment because the department's too old, for example, you know, like we got too many old people, so we're going to start terminating people. That'd be another example. Yeah, it's nice to know that you're protected, right? Disability or genetic information. So that's kind of a broad genetic information statement. All right, so harassment becomes unlawful when one of these two things happens. when it becomes a condition of employment. So in order to stay working with the city, you have to take this harassment. All right, that's the condition of employment. That's when it's unlawful. The second one is it's severe or pervasive enough that a reasonable person, who talks like that? Who says reasonable person? That's an attorney type term, isn't it? Yeah, so a reasonable person would think that it is bad enough. So we have a jury, and you're stating your case. My boss said this, this, and this, and this. And that jury's eyes go, he said what? That wasn't reasonable. Correct? That's who makes that determination. And that's actually important to understand. Because there is no, this is the whole statute, by the way, what we have in front of us. There is no, you're allowed to say this, but you can't say this. Can you imagine what kind of law that would have to be? If it listed every single thing that you could or could not say to every person, it would be amazing. It would be insane. So we go back to that reasonable person test. And that's, by the way, that leaves a little bit of gray area. And I have a couple examples here towards the middle of the course. And some of it would be like, yeah, that may be reasonable or may not be reasonable. All right? And again, you may be able to say something to somebody and be reasonable, but say something completely, or say the exact same thing to a different person, and maybe that's not reasonable. Does that make sense? So it's all kind of case specific as well. All right. So there's also some federal laws that exist. I'm sure you guys have heard of these ones before. We have the Civil Rights Act, which is, what year is that? 1964. We have that one. Then we have the Age Discrimination Act. And that's where the number 40 came in, by the way. That's where it was originally found. And then, of course, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those are the three main federal laws that have to deal with discrimination as well. All right, good. Moving on. So who enforces these laws and statutes? If you were to have an issue here within the city, who's going to enforce it? Initially, it's going to be management, right? Management's going to be taking care of business here. If there's a complaint, management does the investigation, HR does the investigation, and then if you're found at fault, what'll happen typically? There'll be discipline, right? Up to and including termination, depending on severity, right? So that's basically what would happen within the city. But who else enforces it on a broad level? Well, the first one is the courts. How do the courts get involved? Attorneys get involved with everything, right? So they see a case. You hire an attorney because of some kind of discrimination or some kind of a harassment case. Maybe you were forced to quit because your department was so hostile towards you that you just had no other choice. You reported to your supervisor, and they wouldn't do anything about it. Okay, so what's your other option? Find an attorney to take the case. That's when the courts get involved. So they're definitely part of the enforcement arm. We also have the Florida Commission on Human Relations. We have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, which you probably have heard of that before, the EEOC term. Now, there's one more group, and that is the Florida Commission on Ethics. Now, they're probably not going to be dealing with people at your level, but they may be dealing with the people that sit behind here. Okay, so this commission basically looks at elected officials. And when elected officials are accused of doing something inappropriate, that's the group that's going to investigate. And they've made news lots recently, you know, and if you follow local news, you'll see them all over the place. At the state level, at the county level, and at the local and municipal level, they're a pretty active group. And when that commission finds that an elected official did something wrong or unethical, what happens? Usually what happens is they'll resign, right? And if they choose not to resign, who gets to remove them? The governor removes him, and I think it just happened yesterday. Actually, I was reading in my little brief. The governor removed someone from office yesterday. Okay, so moving on. Here's some recent examples. This is the good stuff. You'll like these. This was an inappropriate comment. Basically, there was a mayor, a brand new mayor. This is a Florida example. Okay, these are all Florida examples. A brand new mayor was chairing her very first city commission meeting, which, by the way, as you know, these are all public, right? They're recorded, they're broadcasted in many cases, so people have the right to see them. And basically what she did is she was making a comment publicly that they should hire a Jewish city manager so they could save money. Okay? How many of you in this room are reasonable and would say that that was an inappropriate comment? Raise your hand if you think it's inappropriate. Okay, good. I see every hand up. The next question is, what happens if you were another applicant for the city manager position, but you weren't Jewish and you didn't get the job? Would you have a case? A discrimination case, exactly. Okay, good. This one's probably the most insane. The Commission on Ethics found that this particular mayor was doing some wrongdoings. Basically, what he was asking for was sexual favors from a resident. And you know what the resident wanted? Speed bumps. You heard of this one? It's laughable. So you want, if you want speed bumps, this is what you got to do. Like it's insane. All right. So here's another one. This was a city attorney, and this city attorney was with Fort Pierce. And basically, what the city attorney was doing was instructing his group of female staff members to rate the new hires or the applicants as hot or not. Okay? So imagine being not hired. Do you have a case? Because maybe you're not hot. And maybe you are hot, but you still didn't get hired. Do you still have a case? This is the stuff that should never happen, right? He also made a couple other comments. One of his employees came back from maternity leave, and he called her milkmaid and stuff like that. Just completely inappropriate comments. Talked about baby fat. It's just complete nonsense. That an attorney would do something like that. All right. So at the time, again, this was end of November when I pulled this newspaper article. The legal expenses just to defend this guy were at $114,000. And so we're 4 months after that. I would love to see what the city's been paying for this guy's legal fees. All right, this one here, I did elected officials first. Now here's an employee. This happens all the time. This was a police officer in Ocala. She was an openly gay officer, and it was such a hostile environment that she was actually forced to quit. And I think the real problem is that the brass knew about it, and they didn't do anything about it. So do you think she has some kind of case? Absolutely, yeah. All right, moving on. So those are some pretty good examples. So let's look at the big, broad types of harassment. We already talked about sexual harassment. Most people, I think, inherently know what sexual harassment is. We've kind of it's been drilled into our head. It's part of our culture. We know that we shouldn't say certain things in the workplace, for example. But sexual harassment, believe it or not, is not the big one. The big one that's way more pervasive and way more common is the bullying, believe it or not. And I think the stats are 3 times more likely to be bullied in the job than be sexually harassed in the job. All right, you're nodding. Yeah, I'm sure most people can agree with that. So let's discuss all these. Here's a video. It's a quick video. I want you to tell me what type of harassment it is.
Well, hey there.
Hi, how are you?
Doing much better now. Got my package for you here.
Thank you very much.
I can just get a signature on there.
Sure thing.
If you want to add your phone number on there.
Sexual harassment.
He asked for the phone number.
No, you said better now.
Still no.
Okay, so it's a little hard to hear, but I'll.
Yeah, sure. Hold on 1 second. Let me grab it for you.
Hate to see you go, but I'd love to watch you eat.
Just so you know, those type of lines never work. Like really, they just don't work. Okay, so the first thing is, let's kind of do a reasonable person test. He goes in there and he asks her for her phone number. Is that sexual harassment?
No.
So a reasonable person would say no. He's just trying to get her phone number, right? So that's not sexual harassment. And then she says, but you asked me that last week and it's still no. So is that sexual harassment? We're definitely moving towards that continuum for sure, right? If it isn't, we're getting close. And then he says the comments at the end. And I think everyone would agree that those are inappropriate comments. Okay, so when you look at that thing, initially, probably not. In the middle, the second time, questionable, right? But that last one is completely inappropriate.
All right, so we should be good then for our meeting on Tuesday.
All right, sounds good.
All right, dude, Chris, come here for a second.
What you got?
This is the new chick, Shelby.
The new chick, he says.
Oh, look at that! Wow!
Call that.
Yes, man, that's what I'm talking about right there, man. Woo! Wow, when did you take that picture?
I think it was from like their trip. They took
Man, look at that! Wow, that's unbelievable right there.
Okay, sexual harassment? Okay. The key that I really want to show with this video is the lady who was sitting across the desk was not the target. It wasn't a picture of her. It was a picture of somebody else. So she wasn't the target of the harassment, but could it still be seen as harassment? Why? Yeah, you made someone feel really uncomfortable. And was that an appropriate conversation to have?
Not with her there.
Especially not with her there, yeah. And it may be a completely different scenario if it was a closed office and you guys, but yeah, with her sitting there, use your head, right? That's just not appropriate. Okay, we're moving on.
Oh, hey, Melissa.
Hey,
I didn't know you were working out today.
of course I am. I'm going on vacation.
You getting ready for the Aruba trip?
I am. Gotta get that
Awesome.
body
How many more days until you guys leave?
Oh, I think it's a couple weeks.
A couple weeks?
Yeah.
Looking good. Keep it going.
Yeah.
I mean, you asked for it wearing that, right?
She asked for it wearing those shorts, he says at the end. Okay, so now we're going beyond typical harassment now. We're actually even borderline on assault, right? So that you just be careful with that sort of thing. All right, moving on. So let's take a look at sexual harassment. That's our first one. Obviously, what is sexual harassment? Sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advances. Okay, so that first video would be an example of an unwanted sexual advance. And then it also includes requests for sexual favors, like what the mayor did with the speed bumps. That's a prime example of that. And then the third one is other verbal or physical, like slapping someone on the butt type stuff, those type of things. Now, you know what happens a lot in these classes, and it's happened probably 6 times in the Venice classes that I teach. Whenever the class is kind of getting settled in, you see people kind of messing around with each other, fake harassing each other as a joke. But you know what they're actually doing? They're touching each other. They're doing stuff. What happens if the person that they're joking around with doesn't like it? Right? And that happens every single time. It didn't happen this time. And that's because we're here and you guys, someone's watching, right? But when you go all the other places, you saw that type of behavior happen, which was perfect because I was able to use that as an example during the class. But that's the kind of stuff that happens, that physical conduct, even if it's just joking around, slapping somebody in the butt, giving somebody a wedgie, for example. Yeah, it's funny, but you're grabbing their underwear. That's not appropriate. All right, so sexual harassment sometimes involves what's called a quid pro quo, which that would kind of go along with what the mayor was trying to do, right? You want speed bumps? Sure, I'll get you speed bumps, but you have to do this. In workplace, it would be something probably like, you want that promotion? No problem, but, that kind of stuff. That's the quid pro quo. In order to be sexual harassment, it has to be unwanted, right? It has to be unwelcome, and it has to be offensive. So when you meet those 3 things, you have sexual harassment. Any questions on that? Again, that's one that I think most of us understand. It's something that we've seen or experienced ourselves. How many of you guys have been harassed sexually in your lifetime? Yeah, me too. Interesting. Do you know who obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but traditionally it's a male harassing a female, but it absolutely happens the other way around. In fact, I'm a victim of it. I can attest to that. So it does happen the other way around, but traditionally it usually has to do with the opposite sexes. That's the one who gets most sexual harassment happens. All right, so going back to that reasonable person test. So there is no rule that defines exactly what sexual harassment is. We leave it up to the reasonable person based on the circumstances. Is that everybody clear on that? They're the ones who have to make that choice. So a reasonable person would have to find that behavior to be hostile or abusive. So here's an example. I want you guys to be my reasonable person. Employee A, his name's John, asks employee B, Susie, on a date. Is that sexual harassment? No, not yet? Okay. What if Susie says no? Is it sexual harassment? No? Okay. John never asks Susie again. What happens if 2 months down the road, he's like, hey, Susie, about that drink, you want to try to grab a drink with me again? Still not sexual harassment? Does anyone think that? You're saying maybe? See, now this is the gray area, right? And that's why we have a reasonable person test. So I have two people sitting right in front of me. One says that it is not, and one person says that it may be. All right, so it's...
Depends on what her next answer is.
Well, so you're saying it depends. So she's the one who decides whether it's sexual harassment.
Depends on what her next answer is.
So she says no again.
She says, no, I can't. That means she's willing, but she can't.
Say that again?
If she said, no, I can, is she saying, no, I can't that night, or no, I can't?
Oh, okay, I got you. So basically, not tonight, but tomorrow night I'm free.
Exactly.
Okay, there you go. I got you. We all took that wrong, I think. Okay, so what if he asked again and again and again and again? And it started. Now we definitely know, right? Now it's definitely harassment. Perfect. Okay, good. So now we're going to move on to non-sexual harassment. Non-sexual harassment includes a lot of other stuff that you probably have seen in the workplace. It's any kind of unwanted or unwelcome conduct that could disrupt the work environment. All right, so that's a good example. Sometimes it has to do with ethnic issues. Sometimes it has to do with cultural differences. Sometimes it has to do with just personal differences or racial differences. Sometimes it could be regarding, as we mentioned earlier, sex. You know, you're making fun of their sex or their sexual orientation even. It can be verbal. Now we know what verbal is, right? That's words. We know what physical is. That's contact, physical contact. But the third one on this point is environmental. What does environmental mean? You could harass someone verbally, physically, and environmentally? Like, what does that mean? You don't recycle? Like, what is this? Oh, making him sit in the office where the exhaust comes in? I guess the fire department. We got some you guys firefighters back there? No? What department were you with? Okay. You know what the firefighters used to do with the new people? They used to have this thing, it was called, I can't remember what the title was called, it was a weird title, but they used to make someone, a new person in the middle of the night, guard the diesel tank to make sure no one stole the diesel. So they had to stay up all night watching the diesel tank to make sure no one came and siphoned gas out of it. That's what they would do for the new workers. That'd be an example. Yeah.
Environmental be like turning, like you're spreading rumors about somebody into the environment.
Possibly. They could call, yeah, but I'm thinking that might be more verbal too. What if you put up a poster in someone's locker? Or you left a nasty note on someone's desk? Or you put a sign up in the water fountain that said, women only fountain? All right? Oh, copy machine ones. There we go. I think we've all experienced those back in the day. Yep. Yes?
You know that someone in your office is offended by certain smells and you deliberately like perfume.
Oh, okay. So that would be an example. So you know that someone has an issue with your perfume and you just load it on the next day and the next day and the next day. That is very cruel and unusual. Yeah. Absolutely. That's a good example. Yeah. What's that?
Say how much somebody is cheerful.
Don't you hate those happy people? Exactly. Obviously, this type of harassment could involve bullying, and I'm going to define that and give you some examples of that coming up in a few slides. But inappropriate humor, I really believe this. I don't think that people really want to hurt other people. I just don't believe that's the case. Sometimes it happens, I'm sure. You know, you have those type of conflicts in the workplace. But for the most part, when you see this type of non-sexual harassing behavior, it's probably some kind of joke which isn't funny. Right? You know, they're just trying to be funny. They're trying to say something. They try to do something. They put up a sign, and it's supposed to be funny, and it's not. Like the fire department gave Alan a boomerang. Right? So he's got a boomerang because they thought he was from Australia. Okay, now he has an accent, but okay, so it's a funny example, right? So is it funny? Yeah, but what if he didn't think it was that funny? Could that be harassment? Absolutely. I think that's just not something that's appropriate.
It's called Exhibit 1 for the lawsuit.
Yeah, Exhibit 1. Exhibit 1. Okay, so here's some examples of things that you should just look out for. Any type of comments, especially negative comments about someone's religion. All right? We have different religions. Some people have no religion. And that's wonderful. We're allowed to believe what we want to believe and or not believe, right? So you shouldn't be making fun of someone else's religion. If someone is a Buddhist and you happen to be a Christian, that's fine. Let's coexist. We can work together to get the job done, no matter what religion we are, or no religion. The job of us is to do what? Get the job done, right? And my religion and your religion has nothing to do with that. All right? All right, so of course, racist slang. You guys know what racist slang is. I don't need to repeat it. I don't need to give you any examples. You know what it is. Don't do it. All right? Remarks about an individual's skin color or their ethnic traits. Okay, we're going back to the racial thing, right? We don't need to make remarks about that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. Our job is to get the job done. That's it. Racist drawings or posters, or any kind of drawings or posters that would be offensive for that matter. Offensive gestures. Does anybody want to give me an example of an offensive gesture? No? No? Whoa. So we know what's offensive. Let's just not do that, all right? Making reference to someone's mental or physical disability. So I do have an example where a lady broke her ankle or twisted her ankle or something like that and had a walking boot on for a little while. So immediately she comes to the office with a walking boot on, and what do her coworkers brand her immediately? She's now GIMP, okay? So is GIMP funny? I don't know, not really. It could be, depending on if you're a sick kind of humor kind of guy, but is that something you want to call your coworker? What happens if you twisted your ankle? Do you want to be called GIMP? How about when the ankle boot comes off and that name sticks? Because apparently that's what happened in this case. They kept calling her that. Think it's a little excessive? Yeah, I think so. All right, inappropriate images, videos, emails, letters, memos, all that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about the electronic stuff here in a couple seconds, but how about social media? I'm going to go back to that. How does social media affect all of this? You guys have accounts, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram and stuff like that? This is funny. Now I can determine who's over 40 and who's not, because everyone younger than 40 is like this, and everyone that's over 40 is like, Instagram? Snapchat? What's that? I don't know what Snapchat is, but apparently everyone talks on Snapchat nowadays. So how does your social media life impact your work life?
I don't conflict that. That's separate.
So you don't talk about your coworkers on your social media? What happens if there's some really juicy gossip?
They're less.
All right. I think that's a pretty good rule to live by. So you're allowed to say what you want on your social media, right? You have that right. It's your First Amendment. You can say it. But when you start to bring stuff from work onto your social media, you're crossing a line here. We need to be very careful with that. All right? So just don't say anything on social media that you wouldn't say to somebody in person, if that's a good rule to live by. All right? Moving on, we have offensively talking about stereotypes. I got a couple examples towards the end of the course to show you that. But you guys know what the stereotypes are, so let's not talk about those things, because they could be offensive. It doesn't have to be, and it usually isn't, involving the opposite sex. Again, sexual harassment traditionally is harassing someone of the opposite sex, although it does work the other way too. You know, same sex can harass each other very easily, and it does happen, but traditionally speaking, it's the opposite sex. With this type of harassment, traditionally speaking, it is same-sex harassment. It's men harassing men and women harassing women. That's traditionally what you'll see. That's what the stats show for this type of harassment. It doesn't just have to be coworkers, too. That's actually something that's really important. You guys work for the city, right? So you're dealing with public all day long. How many of you have been harassed by... I didn't even finish the question, and everyone's hands are up. How many have been harassed by members of the public? Yeah, it happens, right? So I guess the first question is, do you have to take it? Do you have to take it? I think we need to make sure that we understand that we don't have to take it. So how do we address that?
Kill them with kindness. That's what I do.
I know, doesn't that just make them angry when you're just so nice to them? But yeah, you be nice to them. You say, I'm sorry that we couldn't make this happen for you, or whatever the case is, right? And if it continues, and it continues to escalate, what should you do?
Go straight to your supervisor.
Go to your supervisor, right? There's people that get paid to deal with this type of stuff, all right? So let's just keep that in mind. It's not just an employee thing. Sometimes it has to do with members of the public. Sometimes it's interagency. Sometimes you guys are working with the county, for example. I know the fire department had a great example of a harassment. And it was one of the newer workers who's still here today. He was being harassed by the EMTs, the county EMTs and the paramedics. And it was a really good example. The older, more seasoned firefighters put an end to it immediately. They took those county guys off to the side and they said, that's not acceptable. And it stopped. It was amazing, right? So that made me really happy when I heard that. But that's a good example of maybe it's not even a coworker, maybe it's a different agency. Maybe it's the sheriff's department, for example, or the county engineers, or whoever you guys interface with. All right, harassed employees could be anyone affected. And again, you don't have to be the target of the harassment to be harassed. You could be a passerby. You could be a person who saw the note hanging on the person's locker. Those are good examples of you're not the target, but you saw it anyways. And here's another one. You don't have to lose your job or quit your job. It doesn't have to be that bad that you have to resign for harassment to be harassment. Okay? In fact, I would like to see you guys catch it way before it gets to that point. Right? I would hate to see you so distraught that you have to lose your job or you have to quit your job before we deal with it. And of course, it doesn't have to cause or have some kind of psychological issue. Right? Again, you don't have to be getting some sort of PTSD from it before it becomes harassment. It's way before that. All right, now going back to the electronic stuff. How many of you guys have city emails, city devices, phones, and other stuff? Okay, good. So do you guys know that when you delete it, it goes away forever? You know what happens, right? When you delete it off your device, where does that email go? It's on the server, and it's never going to go off the server, right? You guys are subject to all the Florida Sunshine rules and laws, and the public has a right to see all your stuff. So if they want to see every email you sent, they have the right to get it. All right? So, in a nutshell, your city devices in particular are used for city work only. Don't intermingle personal stuff with your city devices. The city probably does. Anyone here in IT? No? You have a couple people? Do you guys do audits on people's devices or emails or just? Yeah, I see an absolute yes. So you're being watched. All right, be forewarned. Include your text, your tweets, your emails, anything on a city device. If you are responsible for social media for the city and you're on Facebook all the time doing the postings and you're in there posting stuff on your personal Facebook account, that's all fair game. All right? Yeah, deletion does not delete. Just keep that in mind. Doesn't get rid of it. All right, so let's talk about bullying. Let's read the definition of bullying. I like this definition. This comes straight out of the dictionary. A blustering, browbeating person. We don't say words like that anymore, do we? Blustering. I love that. A person, especially one habitually cruel to others who are weaker. So when I think of bully, what do I think of? Traditionally. Little kids, right? Playground? That's schoolyard bullies, right? That's what traditionally you'd think of. But when I started doing the research on workplace bullying, my eyes were wide open. I was like, holy crap. This stuff happens at the work site. And when I started defining it, I started to see it in my own life, in my own career, and how much of the stuff I've actually seen in my life and experienced. So this is a good example of the type of bullying. It's probably not the same behavior. We're not going to be like shoving people by the bike rack, at work. But there's going to be some other weird, like passive-aggressive kind of stuff, right? So false accusations would be an example of a workplace bullying. How would a false accusation be bullying? What could you do if you made a false accusation against someone? You can make them lose a job. You can get them disciplined. You can get someone in trouble, right? That's bullying. Sabotage. How would you sabotage a coworker? Again, for the same purpose, right? You want to get them in trouble. Preventing them from getting another position, sabotaging their work so that it doesn't look like it's as good as what it was. All right? Do you guys ever feel like that happens to you? All right. Withholding necessary resources. All right, so they need a certain spreadsheet to do a specific task. You came up with this spreadsheet like 2 weeks ago to do the analysis, but you're like, you know what? I spent 3 hours on that spreadsheet. They're going to have to do it again. I don't care. You're withholding that information. You're withholding that tool to get the job done. All right? This is bullying. It's really, it's quite immature when you look at the grand scheme of things here. Put downs, putting people down. You guys know what putting down is? Yeah, okay. The next one is unreasonable work demands. Okay, so you're being asked to do things in one day that traditionally is a 3-day job. Unreasonable? And then when you don't get it done, you're in trouble? That would be a good example of how bullying affects the work site. Exclusion. So how would exclusion work?
Not including you in the committees or team meetings or something like that.
Sure, so not including a person in the committee meetings or team meetings. How about if we have a birthday party or a potluck and everyone's invited except him? You can't come. We don't like that shirt or whatever reason.
Typical.
Is that the way it works around here? No.
It's those meatballs
No,
from
we
last
love
time.
food.
Yeah. If you want to be invited to potluck, just make sure you bring the best dish and you'll be invited to every potluck, right? That's the way that works. Whether they like you or not, you bring those meatballs back and you're coming back. Yeah. So those are examples of bullying. Now, here's the interesting thing is I used to own a company. It was a fairly good-sized safety consulting firm. And I had 2 ladies who worked in my office. And I know now, but I didn't know back then. This is what they were doing. They're constantly trying to get each other in trouble. They were constantly making it look like the other person did something bad. All right? And they would come to my office, and you know this was going to happen because one of them would come to my office and close the door. And he'd be like, hey, did you see what Nikki did? And I'm like, what? What did Nikki do? Right? And that's the kind of stuff that was happening. And I just didn't really see it. And I kind of knew that they were just being mean to one another. But it was bullying. It's 100%. That's what it was. All right, so here's some statistics. I'm going to go back to this. Most bullying is same-sex harassing behavior. So again, it's usually men harassing men and females harassing females. Now I'm going to do this little next point here. You're going to like this. 58% of the perpetrators are women. So women are traditionally pretty nasty to one another in the workplace. Does anyone agree with that statement? It's funny because when I asked that same question at the water treatment plant, it was almost simultaneously. They all went, always. So I don't know what it is, but that's the stats. Yep. Bullying, psychological aggression. You're just messing with people's minds. That's what it comes down to. You're just messing with people. It just doesn't make sense. It's a psychological aggressive. It's often misclassified as personality clashes. Oh, those two just don't get along, right? And as I said earlier, it's 3 times more likely to happen than sexual harassment. So we spend all this time historically on the sexual side of harassment. We completely miss the mark. Bullying is where we should be focusing on. All right, potential concerns. You guys know this. Obviously, when we have a bunch of bullies in the workplace, it's going to affect our culture, right? We're going to have a nasty culture. It's not going to be fun to work anymore. Violence, I don't know exactly what the stats are when it comes to this, but if I had to guess, all the workplace shootings that have happened, what's the likelihood of them starting off with some kind of bullying? It's a pretty good chance, right? All right? Or some kind of perceived injustice. You know, one of those 2 things. And I know for a fact that the school shooters, a lot of them have to do with that. A lot of them were bullied. And that's what kind of started them down that path. Drain on morale. Obviously, when you have bad morale, you have that turnover issue. And as you guys know, turnover is a problem. Right? You want to keep employees, you want to keep good employees, because it's really hard to find good employees. And once you get them, you want to keep them. Low productivity. That's all kind of self-explanatory. Who wants to go above and beyond when they hate the place they work for? Right? I don't. So you'll come to a point where you're just so not happy with where you're working that you're just going to show up. And that's what we don't want to happen. We want you to show up and get your job done and go above and beyond, and you know, there's your vision right there. That's what we want. All right, so here's a good video.
For some reason, the guys took a dislike to Alan from the start.
Alan, man. Big shit collar.
What's up with you today, man? Do you not take some pride in your appearance? Look here.
What?
Okay, so he's kind of awkward, doesn't really know how to fit in.
Get your foot off it.
It didn't take long for them to figure out that he was an easy target. They started making jokes at Alan's expense, called him some choice names, hid his tools, and hung disgusting stuff in his locker. They all seemed to think it was real funny.
Come on, I feel like...
I wouldn't go along with it. I tried to be friendly with Alan so he didn't feel totally cut off. I told the guys to stop, but they kept doing it.
Okay, Alan?
Finally, I had to confront them and make them listen to me. Fellas, what's up? Stuff with Alan? It's not cool. I started by telling them clearly that I thought what they were doing was wrong. It's really time to grow up, guys. I told them that Alan didn't deserve what they were doing to him. I used to be proud to work with you guys. What happened? All he's trying to do is get his job done. And I feel like he's being constantly harassed while he's doing it. I told them they had to stop now, or I would have to take it to the next level.
Bruh, you don't have to do all that. You just been having a little fun.
I guess if it means that much to you, we'll stop.
Good. It does.
Whatever you say, man.
If you go along with it and don't say anything, it's just as bad as if you're doing it yourself. But if you do say something, you can make a real difference. When you're right, and they'll know it.
Pretty good video, right? There's two parts of that video I really like. The first part is, it just shows how stupid bullying is. Like, look at the immature behavior that those guys were doing. Like, stepping on the guy's pipe, messing around with him, calling him names, stuff like that. Like, what adult does that? Right? It's very childish behavior. That's the first thing. The second part I really like about that is how it got stopped. Okay, so Alan wasn't comfortable sticking up for himself. And that's okay. Not everyone has the ability to stick up for themselves. Okay? Because you, as a new worker, you're inherently weaker, right? So you're wanting to fit in. You take it because that's part of the deal, right? Like all the people that we used to haze, basically, when I was a young lifeguard, that they just have to take it. That was part of the deal. All right. You know, it would have been really nice if someone would have told us to stop. Someone else. Never even thought about it. Okay. So, how many of you guys would stick up for yourself? Let's just do a little pretest. If you were being bullied, how many of you would say, "Hey, that's enough. Stop it"? Okay. That's actually a lot of hands. How many of you would stick up for somebody else? That's more hands, actually. So more people would find, but based on the judges in this room, judging by the show of hands, more people would stick up for other people than stick up for themselves. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Why?
Confrontation.
You're trying to avoid the confrontation? Maybe you think you can take it and it's not so bad? Right? That could be it. So maybe you know what's going on. You're like, it's not so bad. These guys are just being jerks. It's not a big deal. So you don't stick up for yourself, but at the same time, that same behavior happening to somebody else, you would intervene. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. This is our last section. What do we do about the harassment? Well, step number one, before we do anything, let's prevent harassment from happening. Right? So we don't have to do anything about it. So do a self-assessment. How many of you have said something or done something that was wrong in your life? Okay, that's what I thought. Everyone has their hands up. So now that we know what's wrong, we know what's not wrong, what should we do? Well, let's knock it off. Right? Let's not do that stuff. Let's not say that. That one joke that we're about to say, think before you speak, right? And let's just not say it. All right? Which is step number 2. Practice and support ethical and respectful behavior. So we know it's not acceptable. Let's not do that. All right? That's the first thing. If we can do those first 2 steps, guess what should never happen? We should never have any problems, right? We should never have any actual harassment because we're controlling ourselves. All right? Now, what happens if someone can't control themselves and they continuously they're harassing you? Well, if it's you, step number 3, what I'd like you to do is communicate with them. Okay? And again, if you're comfortable and if it's safe to do so, absolutely feel free to stick up for yourself. Be empowered. Say, no, we're not accepting this type of behavior. Don't do it. Stop. That's inappropriate behavior. Whatever you say, say. What happens if you see someone doing to someone else? Same thing, just like we saw in the video. Let's take that as an opportunity to intervene. Again, if you feel safe to do so and you're comfortable doing so, help out your coworker. As we just demonstrated with our show of hands, a lot of people won't do it for themselves. And maybe they're looking for someone else to do it for them. You know, when I was 18 and I was being harassed by the older lady lifeguards, it would have been nice if one of the other more seasoned employees would have said, hey, what you guys are doing to these young kids, because we were kids at the time, right? It's not appropriate. Would have been nice. That would have stopped it. All right, so if you're a victim, stop the harasser, ask him to stop. That's the key here. If it doesn't stop, that's when the policy kicks in, right? If they continuously are harassing you after you tell them to stop, what do you do according to the policy? Report it to your supervisor. And if it's your supervisor doing the harassment, report it to HR. Exactly. Good stuff. The investigations are going to be done as confidentiality as possible. So when Alan receives the report, he's not going to go over there and start interviewing people and say, hey, Johnny said that Susie did this. Is this true? Okay, because that's not very confidential, is it? But there's going to be questions being asked. Now, you guys work in small departments for the most part. So when those questions are happening, a lot of times people will figure it out. But all the stuff that Alan's going to do in terms of the investigation, there's not going to be any names. The final report, is it going to have any names written in it?
Well, there'll be names, but not necessarily quotes. So I have to list like who they talk to, and then there'll be a summary, like an amalgamation of what the findings were. But I'll try to avoid any particular people to particular quotes.
Okay, do you hear that? I'll repeat if you didn't hear it. So he's going to list who he spoke to in the report, which is obviously a good practice in an investigation, but he's not going to specifically say what you said. So what you're saying during the interview is going to be confidential. All right? Good stuff. All right, so if you are the victim of harassment and you make that report, here's a couple things that you should do. First of all, don't retaliate. Don't harass the harasser, because if you get caught harassing the harasser, what just happened to you? You also became a harasser, all right? So that's not going to be good. There'll be 2 investigations happening, and one of them's going to be on you. All right, so that can't help at all. But what you could do is you can keep a diary. Keep a diary of who you spoke to, what happened, who was in the room, the witnesses, because all this stuff's going to be really, really important when the investigation's happening. Agreed? It's good to have that. Another thing you could do, and honestly, this isn't just for harassment, this is for any issues that you may be having at all, or anyone in your household, is tap into the Employee Assistance Program. That program exists, it's a benefit to you, and if you haven't used it, and you're having issues with anything, financial issues, if a gambling addiction or any other kind of addiction, if your kid, for example, your child lives with you in your home, they're eligible for the EAP too. So if they're getting bullied at school, this is a resource for them. And this is completely confidential. You call up a number, they give you a list of providers for that type of service. So let's say you need financial counseling. They'll give you a list of financial counselors locally, and you get to pick one that you want. They give you a little authorization number, and then when that provider submits the bill to the city for payment, there's no names, there's an authorization number. So you can get that help for free, okay? Use it if you haven't used it. Marriage counseling, if you're married, you know what that's like, that's included. What else is included? It's almost anything. Any kind of issues you're having, they have resources for. All right, so where would you rather work? Happy or hostile? Everyone agrees hostile? Yes? That's what I figured. Okay, so let's just take a look. What happens when we have a good work environment? Well, of course, everyone's going to be positive. We're going to reduce our turnover and our absenteeism. That's all going to be good. We're going to have good public opinion. That's awesome. Look at your vision, right? We want to maintain Venice as a vibrant, charming, historic community in which to live, learn, and work and play. Like, we have a vision of this. We're going to help achieve that vision with having a good workforce. Reduce potential for workplace violence. Yeah, of course. If everyone's happy, we're going to have less people getting punched in the face. Right? That's very true. And of course, when we have a hostile work environment, the exact opposite holds true. You know, we increase all these things. All right, so let's just kind of do a quick summary. Step number 1, say it. Self-assessment. Look at your own behavior. Now we know that we've done stuff that's wrong. Now, don't do that anymore. Stop it. Be respectful. Step number 3, communicate. Communicate with the person who's doing the harassment. Hopefully they get the point, and they stop. All right? If you see something that's happening to somebody else, intervene. Let's help out our coworkers. Last step, if that all fails, that's when the policy kicks in. We can't get them to stop. They're continuously doing it. What do we do now? That's when we make the report. Okay? I think this is a very, very, very possible thing. I think you can make this happen. And I know you're making it happen already. The fire department was a prime example of that. When they stood up for that new firefighter to those county guys, that's a prime example that they were doing it and they're making it happen. Agreed? That was awesome. Okay, so here's a case study. This is our last couple slides. I want you guys to tell me what you would do in this case. A coworker approaches you and asks you out for drinks with his or her friends, okay? You say, no, thank you. And that night, you get a text with a picture attached to it. I'm not going to describe the picture. Use your own imagination. And it says, see what you're missing? What would you do? Depends on the picture. It's funny because everyone says that. Let's just say it's an inappropriate picture. I have my daughter in the back of the room. I don't need to go any more details on that. So what do we got? So what are we going to do?
Not respond, that's for sure.
Okay, so you say you're not going to respond. How many of you actually would respond?
I would respond.
What would your response say? Okay, you would say, hey, don't send me stuff like that anymore. Okay, that's actually good. Both of those are right, by the way. I don't think you can go wrong in any of these cases. But if you actually respond, then you're saying that's A, not appropriate, and B, what happens if that was on a city device and now there's naked pictures of somebody on your phone? Right? And now they do an audit and they see that there's naked pictures of somebody on your phone. You could say, look, that was texted to me, and here's what my response. At least you have a little bit of leg to stand on now, right? Do you change your mind? You're going to respond now?
I'd respond to them first and say, don't ever do that again.
Okay, and that'll be the next step. So how many of you are going to respond the next day or the next time you see that person saying, hey, that text you sent me? I see a lot of hands go up. Yeah. Also, again, there's no right or wrong answer. The key is, would all of you do something about it? How many of you would just ignore it? You had a half hand up like this. You might ignore it? Okay.
If it's on a work phone, you're going to be left with no choice but to report it as soon as possible. Because now it's on a work phone, and I'm not going to be responsible for your stupidity.
Okay.
If it's
Yeah,
on
they
my
also
work
leave it on there and have to think about it.
Yeah.
Until somebody finds it.
So if it was on a work
I
phone,
have to protect myself. I'm not the one that made that poor decision. But if you're going to send it on my city cell, I have no choice but to report it right away. I'm not going to get in trouble for that.
okay, agreed? So you're not even going to talk to the person. You're going to go straight and make the report.
Well, I'm going to tell the person, you left me no choice. I would have to be honest with them. There's no way of saying, no, forget about it, don't worry about it. It's not going to go away. Because even if they apologized, it is there permanently.
Permanently on your phone.
Now I have to protect my job and myself. Because now if I fail to report it, now I'm going to get in trouble. There's no way around it. Friend or no friend, I don't have a choice.
Cool. You guys agree with this? 100%. Yeah. You have to protect yourself.
It would be captured someplace else, and we would know about it. If we would see you send it.
Yeah, so it's.
Good.
We have another piece of software that would capture all those text messages.
But I don't want to be.
Do you guys know that, by the way? Everyone's like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So nobody sent me anything.
So I think the key lesson learned on this example is we have a couple options. We can immediately respond back and say, stop it, right? What I've found with most of these examples, the sooner we address it, the easier it's going to be. right? If we address something before it starts to escalate, because if we don't address it immediately, what happens if there's videos and stuff, other stuff being sent and phone calls at 3 a.m. and all this stuff, right? It's easier just to immediately respond and say, don't send me stuff like that anymore. All right? Then it stops. Then there's no more temptation for him or her to send more that night. All right? So the sooner the better when it comes to a lot of this stuff. If you want to report to your supervisor, great. Not a problem. If you want to have a conversation with them the next day, great. There's no right or wrong answer to these things. But the key is that you're doing something about it. All right, next example. Your boss continues to push you for results, makes you work on projects that are just more difficult than everyone else in the department. You feel like you're being pushed harder than everyone else and that he's just being mean to you. What are you going to do? Does that sound familiar, by the way? You ever have that problem? What could it be? Could it be harassment? It could be harassment. What else could it be?
He just needs some work done.
Maybe that there's a special project that needs to get done. Yeah.
Maybe he sees potential.
Yeah, maybe it's the exact opposite of harassment. Maybe he sees a level of work ethic and potential in you that the other people don't have. That's possible, right? Very possible.
Yeah.
So what would you do in this case? Okay, so the comment was have a conversation with your manager. How many of you agree with that statement? Absolutely. That's the first thing you should do. So before we start to blow this out of proportion, this could just simply be some kind of miscommunication. This could be him actually respecting you, right? So let's discuss it. That's the key. Very good. Case study number 3, what would you do? Just what every time you walk past the receptionist, she comments on how well you look and smell. All right? And that she wishes that she were 10 years younger. You find it flattering, and you politely smile back. Okay? What are you doing at this point? You're just... You're ignoring it, really, right? And by ignoring it, what's going to end up happening? It's probably going to keep going, right? So this case is exactly what happens. One day in the copy room, she puts her hands on your shoulders and says, I see the way you're looking at me, and I would love to get to know you more. Okay. Well, she did, and it's you. Okay, so what are we going to do? Ideally, it would have been nice if immediately from the very beginning, you would have said, hey, not interested. Thanks for the comments, but just not interested. Hopefully that would have been enough to stop it. But we didn't do anything, and it started to escalate. It started to snowball. So now we're in a situation where we're recorded in a small copy room, and someone's hands are on our shoulders, and she's whispering sweet nothings into your ear. What do we do now?
This is where you need to tell her, I'm sorry, but I feel uncomfortable, and this needs to stop.
Okay, so you're going to immediately at that point say, not acceptable, not uncomfortable, or whatever you're going to say. But you're going to, at that point, is that it? We're done?
No, and if it doesn't, then you need to report it.
Okay. How many of you would make a report right after this? You tell them to stop, but you still go talk to your supervisor.
I would add in the conversation, if anything else happens along these lines, it's going to go for, I'm taking it further and give them the opportunity to squelch it.
Okay. So you're going to basically make a comment saying, stop it, and if it happens again, I'm going to talk to the supervisor. Okay.
What if she turns it around against you?
Very interesting. That's never happened before, right? So you make that comment, and immediately she goes to the boss saying, you're the one who had your hands on her shoulders. Could that happen?
Well, that's why
possibly. In the copy room, too? Actually, if you're going to have cameras, it probably should be in the copy room. Now that I think about it, but okay, back on track. So what I would say is, in this particular case, I would go let the boss know and say, this is what happened. Because what could potentially be happening? Maybe this has happened before. Maybe this isn't the first time she's laid her hand on somebody. Maybe this is a repeated type behavior. And also, just to kind of cover your butt a little bit, do we need to get her fired? No. Maybe she's going to stop. But let's at least let the boss know that this happened, it was communicated to her to stop, and let's keep an eye on it. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, good. This next one is interesting, too. One of your coworkers is of Asian descent. A few of your other coworkers say things about him knowing Kung Fu and making fun of other ridiculous stereotypes. They're trying to be funny, right? They're not really trying to hurt them. They're just trying to be funny. And although he takes it well, he has told you, it's between the two of you, he's told you that he thinks these guys are idiots. So clearly, he's not okay with it, right? What will you do at this point? So you have a guy who's being harassed because of a stereotype, verbally. What are you going to do?
Well, I would encourage him to report it and support him if he doesn't feel comfortable doing it. And if he's still not willing, then I think then you can go and say something.
Okay, that's actually really good. That's the first time I've ever heard that. Most people say that they're going to go in and intervene on his behalf. But what you just said is you're actually going to encourage him and support him to do it himself. I actually really like that. All right? And if he's still unwilling to do it or he's not able to do it, then we still have that intervening option, right? But I do like that. I think that would work very well. Any other options we can do?
If he doesn't want to say anything, after trying to encourage him, I would ask, would it be okay if I reported it myself and give him that option?
Sure.
Most people just don't want to.
They don't want to make trouble.
They don't want the drama.
They don't want the drama. And actually, that's interesting because I asked that question to class this morning. I'm going to do it again. How many of you guys would intervene on his behalf? How many of you would just mind your own business? Be honest with me. Because there was a guy in the class this morning that said he would mind his own business. And that's not wrong, by the way. You don't have to get involved in everybody's business, right? I'm not saying you have to. If you want to have a good work culture, it does help in those cases, but interesting. So you guys would all agree.
So if you do, it depends on the situation, but if you do get involved, all of a sudden you're pulled into it too, and then who knows, your name is thrown around, and all of a sudden you become...
That's why people don't want to get involved with stuff, right? Like you go and have you seen those videos where people are injured or getting beat up on the street and everyone just walks right by? People in today's society just don't want to get involved with other people's messes. And honestly, I don't blame them because a lot of times when you get yourself involved, you kind of get pulled into the situation too, right? So.
I don't know what it is, obviously. Somebody's getting beat up, I'd get involved, but...
Well, here's a good example.
The relationship issue that two people can't get along, I'm not going to get pulled into it if I don't have to because they need to either get along or figure it out.
I've seen situations where people got hurt, little kids got hurt on playgrounds, and adults will not help little kids who are hurt because they don't want to get involved. Right? It's not their kids. Usually people help their own kids, but they won't help other people's children because they don't want to get involved. So that's the kind of stuff. That's the weird culture in society that's happened in the last 40 years. But anyways, I think you guys made the right choice in this one. I think we can encourage him to do it himself. If he's not willing or able to do it himself, let's ask him if we can do it on his behalf. And if he allows us, then absolutely, this is a prime example of let's help him. He clearly doesn't like it. This is our opportunity to make our workplace better. All right, do you guys have any questions about anything that we discussed in the course?
Yes.
Go for it.
How do you address body odor properly?
Okay. How do we address body odor properly? So if someone in your department or someone you work with has body odor, could you have an adult conversation with them?
I guess. I would want to.
Because it's kind of embarrassing? Yeah. I can see how that could be embarrassing. I don't know. I would start off having a conversation with them. Is there a guy here? Is it? You've been forewarned. Okay, anyone else have a question? Yes.
I'm just kind of curious because clearly something that can be considered offensive to someone is subjective.
Very subjective, yes.
So how can we then define if something is offensive or not? Because what if someone were to say, I find this offensive just because they want to get you in trouble?
You're in trouble. That's good. That's a good point. If someone makes an accusation saying that you said something, maybe you didn't even say it, or maybe that it wasn't really meant to be offensive, but they took it as offensive, right? That goes back to the reasonable person test, again, because there is no rule that says this is and this is not offensive. It's all situational. So if you say something to one of your coworkers who's male, he may not take that as offense. You say the exact same thing to someone who's female, they might get offended, right? So the best order of business is let's just not say anything that could be remotely offensive. Although I realize that's probably unrealistic because we're going to say stuff, all right? So when that happens, we have to trust that the supervisory staff and that HR is going to look at that as a reasonable person. Make sense? And especially a jury, if it ever came to a jury trial, that's when you would have a true group of 6 people, your peers, your jury, as your reasonable people.
You say most of the sexual harassment is with the opposite sex.
Yes.
Okay, now, let's say the women will sometimes tell each other, oh, you're wearing a nice, I love your blouse.
Commenting on the clothes or whatever, sure.
Your hair or something like that, but that's kind of inappropriate for a man to say to a woman, isn't it? Because she might take it as...
That's basically exactly what we just talked about right there, isn't it? How you can say one thing to somebody and the exact same thing you wouldn't be able to say to somebody else. Yeah, it's...
The best thing is not to compliment them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's probably the best thing.
When you talk about harassment, it's full circle, where it could be the public on a city employee, somebody from the public, it could be an elected official. And like I worked in the healthcare, a lot of times it was doctors on staff, patients on staff. How do you address somebody that's not necessarily within the realm of...
Okay, so someone from the public is harassing a city employee, basically? Okay, well, that's pretty easy. The supervisory staff will go out there and have a talk to them. If it doesn't stop, at that point, there's a lot of legal things you could do. You could do cease and desist. You could do, if it's like a stalking type behavior, you can get the police involved. There's things that can happen. But what's really important is just because you work for the city doesn't mean you have to take all that crap from the residents. All right, we have to kill them with kindness, as you said. We have to be nice and have the public, the customer service in mind. But we don't have to take harassment, and we definitely don't have to take, sexual harassment or anything at that level. Okay, but report that to your supervisor and let them figure it out. Good questions. Nothing else? Crickets? Okay, good. Well, thank you guys for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to get on the interstate and enjoy my 3.5-hour drive home. Bye. Thank you.